Hello, my name is Emily Carding. I'm the author of FaeryCraft and the creator of, amongst other things, the Tarot of the She. So today I'm going to be talking to you about fairy and how we can honour them through the 7 directions and the 7 qualities that go with those 7 directions according to the septagram which I worked with in FaeryCraft, published by Llewellyn in 2012. So if first of all we think about what exactly fairy is, this in itself is a huge subject which we could talk about for hours. Of course, we have the idea that comes from post-Victorian times of the diminutive flower fairy, but also from Victorian times we have the works of the great seers who showed us luminous beings that dwelled within the land, with whom we could connect and communicate. And also we hear that fairies are perhaps the spirits of the dead, the lost ancestors, the nameless ancestors on the lands upon which we live. And in many ways, all of these are true. Fairy beings, as energy beings that live within the earth itself, in a different dimension, on a different frequency to our existence, and yet alongside us. They are the voices of the earth, but they are beings of energy. And therefore, since they don't have a physical form as we understand it, then they will appear to us according to our own experiences and our own perceptive filters. If we think each one of us experiences life and the universe in a unique way according to our lives and our perceptions, then when we experience raw energy, our brain will interpret it in a way that it can understand. So those of us with an expectation perhaps to see a flower fairy may well indeed see that. That may be the way that our brain is interpreting that energy. But what is closer to the truth of the matter is that these beings are luminous guardians of the inner earth, and that to work with fairy is a noble undertaking that requires one to walk a path of honour. And I'd like to talk a lot today about the quality of honour, because it's one that's not mentioned, I think, enough in magical practice. I believe that there has been a trend, perhaps from the 90s onwards, of certain popular writers popularising the idea that fairies are there to help us, that they're there to do good things for us, to make things happen, much in the same way as angels supposedly might help us find a parking space or some such. This is not an honourable way of dealing with fairy, and it's not honourable expectations of fairy. And whilst it may lead to some success because of the popularity of these works, which have led to the strengthening of certain false thought forms, which are created through belief and intent, which may well satisfy certain requests, that work is not authentic. When we work with fairy, yes, indeed, they are able to do things in the inner worlds that we are not able to do, but it is also our work to do things on our level of existence which they are not able to do. And so it is a cooperative path. In the 17th century grimoire known as the Sloane manuscript, we hear, "The nature of those spirits, or elves, is that they are affected with and love all those that love them, and hate all those that hate them. Yea, they know both our minds and thoughts in a great measure, whereby it comes to pass that we may easily move them to come to us, if we rightly understand the rules thereof." It's very interesting when you look at the grimoires that whereas for demons and angels there's very definite ways in which you hold dominion over them. There are certain circumstances and you are able to give them orders. Whereas, as for fairy beings, you leave them nice food out and hope that they're nice to you, and hope that they can't detect any lies in your heart, which is why honour is such an important quality when dealing with them. So, when I wrote FaeryCraft, I took the symbol of the septagram, which is often used in contemporary magical practice as a symbol for people of the fairy faith or of elven faith. This is actually only a very recent attribution, in fact, started in the 1980s by a movement known as the Elf Queen Daughters, who believed that they were elven beings born into a human form. So this was also the start of the Otherkin movement. But in fact, the number 7 is very significant through many magical practices, and it's very significant in fairy folklore. Of course, it represents the 7 days of the week. It represents the 7 colours of the rainbow, and also the 7 directions: north, south, east and west, above, below and within. And it's those all-encompassing directions that are most effective to work with when we're working with fairy, because it's very much about how we connect with the world. Working with fairy beings is about interdimensional connectivity. In FaeryCraft, I ascribe different qualities that are essential for working with fairy that correspond to the elements to each of these directions, and hence also to each of the points on the septagram. So we started with the element of air and the quality of knowledge, and that was the direction of east. Then we have the quality of connection, which connects with the direction of within, or the stars within each of us that connect together to form the great constellation of whatever group we are working in. Then we have the quality of trust, the element of earth, which is the direction north. The quality of honour is associated with the direction of above, or the sun. And the quality of magic corresponds to the below, or to the moon, the hidden realms. The quality of joy, which corresponds to the element of water and the direction of the west. And the quality of inspiration, which connects to the element of fire and the direction of south. And all of these 7 qualities together give us our central point of balance, which is so important. Any one quality taken to extreme without the balance of the other qualities could only lead to instability. And since when you're dealing with otherworldly realms, it's always so important to have your anchor firmly placed, because you're walking a very thin line. It's a very narrow bridge that you're walking when you're dealing with otherworldly powers. So that balance is extremely important. We'll look at each of these qualities in turn, just to give you an overview of the sort of thing that they would entail. And then if you wish to look at them in more depth, you might want to look at FaeryCraft, or do feel free to drop me a line. So we've already started to look a little at knowledge when we're talking about what fairy is. There are so many different theories, so many different understandings, and so many different versions of what could be considered truth. But since we're specifically putting a focus on how we can honour fairy, let's look at the knowledge side of that and take a quick look at some fairy etiquette. So when we're out in nature and we want to make contact with fairy, what are the things we should avoid? What are the things that we should be sure to do? So one of the most well-known prohibitions is, of course, that of against cold iron. And there are a number of different theories as to its origins and reasoning. It has been suggested that it's man's use of iron in weapons, bringing an end to the Bronze Age, which originally drove the fairy race beneath the hollow hills and beyond the Vale. This may have some truth in it, but the simple fact is that iron has the power to hurt all spiritual creatures, not only fairy beings. This is why magicians use a sword containing iron to control summoned entities, as in the rituals that we've already mentioned from the grimoires. It is considered extremely rude to carry iron tools or use them in FaeryCraft, and for this reason it is best to avoid steel as well if you can. When cutting any plants or trees for fairy work, a sharp knife of bronze, stone or bone is preferable, and this must also be with agreement from the spirit of the plant. So it's a really useful skill to learn how to journey to the spirit of the plant and communicate with it to see that it's willing to be used in your work. Permission is such an important part of working with fairy and with spirits of the land. Many magicians go blundering off into what they think is wonderful sacred locations out on the landscape, usually are wonderful sacred locations out of the landscape, which also happen to be occupied by magical beings. Start going about their magical ritual without asking permission first, and I've known several cases of quite severe things happening. I think possibly the one that I experienced most directly and most extremely was that some people who were running a sweat lodge forgot to ask permission of the spirits of the land. One of them ended up rolling around on the floor because he'd been set on fire. So I can't stress enough the importance of simple manners. Be polite at all times. Now, this also goes from taking anything from sacred sites and from trees. One of the chief causes of anger amongst the fairy realm against humanity is our propensity for taking without the thought of asking or giving fair exchange in return. This is another reason for working on your connection with your intuition, because that way you will be able to sense whether a site is sacred, and also you'll be able to sense what the response of that site is, or what the response of that tree might be to whatever your request is. Not all places that are sacred are marked in obvious ways, and certainly not those places that are sacred to fairy and beyond the ken of humanity. Permission must always be asked from the spirits of place before working on their land, and nothing must be taken from the area without explicit permission. There are well-documented accounts in folklore of ill-fated men cutting down fairy trees, usually thorns, or even taking branches from them and then being stricken with serious illness and even death, and moving sacred stones also elicits similar punishment. There is some wonderful, if you're interested in folkloric accounts of real-life encounters of fairy, Lady Gregory and her visions and beliefs in the west of Ireland is a must-read. Here's a short extract. There was a man on the road between Chavy and Marble Hill, where there is a fairy plum stone that stands straight up, and it's about 5 feet in height, and the man was building a house and carried it away to put above his door. And from the time he brought it away, all his stock began to die, and whenever he went in or out, night or day, he was severely beaten. So at last he took down the stone and put it back where it was before, and from that time nothing has troubled him. And in November in 2011 there was a report in an Irish newspaper of a wealthy man who lost all his fortune, reputedly because he had removed an ancient burial mound from his land. And the headline read, "Sean Quinn's downfall is fairy's revenge." A clear sign that belief in the ancient fairy lore is alive and well, even in the newspapers. Now, when we're talking about manners, we think about please and thank yous, obviously. There's a very interesting piece of fairy lore that says we should never thank fairy beings for the things that they do for us. You see this in a number of tales. You thank them or you give them payment of any kind, and this results in the fairy leaving and never being seen again. Now, I think that this is down to a misunderstanding. This is my opinion. I think this is down to a misunderstanding. Because if we just say thank you, and we think that that's it, that's our work done, I think as human beings that's the exchange that we might have. Somebody might do something nice for us and we say thank you, and that's it. With fairy beings, there needs to be an equal level of exchange between us in order for that to be considered a fair exchange. So to just say thank you for something that they have done for us may be seen as dismissive and therefore rude, in fact, and not manners at all. So we must be grateful, but our gratitude is better shown through continued cooperation and teamwork, fully reciprocal action and exchange of energy, rather than simply saying thank you as a dismissive gesture, which will result in that connection perhaps being damaged or lost. Lying at any point is an absolute no-no, and I cannot emphasize enough how this does not just apply to your magical work. When you are walking a magical path, I'm going to get ranty, I always get ranty, I apologise, but when you are walking a magical path, that is your life path. It's not just, for this hour a day or this 2 hours a week when I'm dedicating myself to my magical practice, then I'll follow these rules. Your heart is with you all the time, therefore your fairy practice is with you all the time. So I cannot emphasize enough how much all of this applies to your interaction with people that you work with, everybody that you meet, not just the fairy beings. Your interactions must be honourable, otherwise your whole energetic matrix is damaged. Just be a good person, really, is so important, and then your energy will be pure, your intents will be pure, your magic will work better. It's a win-win situation. So lying is an absolute no-no, as much as you can avoid it. That goes for white lies, it goes for everything. It's messy. Lying is a messy and dirty energy that just involves in things getting overly complicated and muddied. Always be truthful, and fairies will be able to tell if you are a truthful and honourable being or not, and they will choose not to deal with you. And I think much of where we get the idea of fairies as being mischievous or deceptive themselves comes from them teaching us the lesson of why lying is a bad idea, or the fact that they have become so used to humanity as being promise breakers. And of course, finally, another very well-known bit of fairy etiquette is that of whether or not you should eat fairy food. Now, folklore would tell us not to eat fairy food with good reason. Don't just willy-nilly think, that it's all right to do that until you've built up a good connection and you understand why you are partaking of that and what it means, what its significance is. It would be a very sacred act which would build the connection with that realm, and it's something certainly to be built up to. So, just as a general note, it's to be avoided unless it's under very, very specific and well-informed circumstances. So moving on to the quality of connection. Each one of these qualities is equally as important as the others. A connection is so terribly important because it's not just about how we connect to fairy. I mean, what do we even mean by that when we're talking about connecting to fairy? It's a soul-to-soul connection. If you might consider that fairies are an aspect of the world's soul, just as in some sense we are, anything that is invested with soul is all connected through that energy. So when we talk about connecting with fairy, many people might think that means being out of touch with reality, or the everyday, or the mundane physical world. Not at all. Connection is absolutely about being fully in the world. And to be fully in the world, you must be aware of the physical world around you and your daily needs and the needs of the people and other beings, physical beings around you. You can get lost in otherworldly and magical needs and purposes and think that somehow elevates you above and then you've lost it instantly. As soon as you start thinking that that has somehow elevated you above other people, then you've lost it. Connection with each other, connection with ourselves is so important. One of the questions that people most often ask about fairy is how to see them. We live in a very visually orientated culture, so it's natural that people want to see fairies with their eyes in order to truly believe in them. And they understand that fairy beings are elusive, but they believe in them regardless. But nevertheless, the emphasis on needing to see and the implication that only a chosen few are allowed to, this can lead to disappointment, or it can lead to the mind creating an illusory experience. Once you start going that way, that's a very slippery slope, unfortunately, so we want to try to avoid that. It's a difficult trap to escape. So our first step in trying to contact fairy, it needs to be within, it needs to be about connecting energetically, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to see something. More than likely doesn't mean that you're going to see something with your eyes. The imagination is the tool that we train to be able to perceive these energies. As I spoke about earlier with our perceptive filters. So if you were to go out into the woods and desperately try to see a fairy, that means that you might be then closing off different other perceptive possibilities that might present themselves, different ways in which you might possibly perceive whatever energies were around you in that space. So for me, and my personal experiences, the connection with fairy comes through the heart. It comes through having an open heart and perceiving through the heart, through empathy, through our feelings, and through training us, our perceptions to the extent that those feelings, then the perception of those feelings through the heart, can be so subtle and so honed that they can almost then become words and pictures. It's an empathic connection. And if we approach with an open heart, free from distrust and the ravages of cynicism, then we can soon feel the presence of the spirit within the land. We see it not through our eyes, but through our whole selves, through all of our senses and through all of our experiences. Fairy beings are fluid energy, and they're not tied to linear time and physicality as we are, and so their appearances, as we've already discussed, may differ wildly. So to help you with this quality of connection, I'd like to offer you this exercise, which is called Becoming the Fairy Tree, and this can be performed, if possible, out in nature. When I say can be performed, I really would suggest strongly that you perform it out in nature, but of course it can also be performed in your living room if necessary. And it's to be performed standing on a flat and even surface with your feet slightly apart so that you feel strong and stable. And if possible, barefoot is best. Standing barefoot on the grass, with your hands by your sides and palms facing down to the ground, focus on your breathing and use it to calm your mind. As you breathe out, release any worries or tensions of the day. As you breathe in, remember your focus and intent of connection. If you can, breathe in steadily and deeply for the count of 7. Hold for 3, and then out again over 7. Wait for 3, then breathe in again for 7, and continue. 3 and 7 are sacred numbers in FaeryCraft. Don't worry if you find this difficult, it will become easier with practice. Maintaining this steady breathing pattern, visualize your feet sinking into the ground. You are as solid and immovable as a tree. From your feet, imagine strong roots growing, sinking deep into the ground. Take your time to feel the roots growing and drawing the energy from the ground. You are strong, vital, and stable. Once you can feel your roots in the earth beneath your feet, keeping your arms straight, slowly raise your hands until they form a V shape above your head. Remember to keep focusing on your breathing, slowly and deeply, in and out. Keeping your hands raised, imagine your arms as your branches reaching high into the sky, just as your roots reach deep into the ground. Leafy shoots grow from your fingers and stretch into great tree limbs, strong and graceful. Hold this image in your mind as you keep your breathing slow, deep and steady. When you are ready, with your next breath in, imagine you are drawing light from the inner earth up through your roots. The light and energy moves up your body slowly and surely with each inward breath, through your roots, into your legs, and finally into your torso. Draw the energy up into your heart and feel it opening your energy center. Now, holding that energy in your center, focus on your branches. Feel the light coming from the sky above, the power of the sun and stars as it flows into you. With every breath, feel the cosmic energy move down through your branches and into your body. Allow the energy from above to meet with the energy of below in your heart. Feel the power of the two forces meeting in your center, how you are connected to all worlds, bridging the gap between. Maintain this connection for 7 breaths, breathing in for 7, holding for 3, and releasing over a count of 7. When you are ready, release the energy back to the source with every outward breath. First, back up through the branches. Once the cosmic energy is released, on your next breath out, slowly lower your arms so that the palms of your hands once more face the floor. As you do so, release the energy back into the ground. Your energies have now been mixed with both the underworld and the upper world. Once you've done this, you give thanks to the powers of place and sit or stand in silence for a while to process your experience. Our next quality to look at would be that of trust and the element of earth, or the direction of north. Trust relating to how we work with our fairy allies, obviously meeting a fairy ally in the first instance, and then a relationship of trust, just as it is with any other personal being that we meet, is built up over time. And with this also connecting to the element of earth, it's a good time to look at how fairy relates to the physical landscape around us and what those points of contact that we find in the landscape might be. Because although meditations and journey work are all very well and good, to work with fairy really is about connecting with the earth. And really, if you're going to connect with the earth, then you need to get out in nature. Or out in your landscape, even if it be an urban one, because nature is always there under the surface. The roots of trees are still there under the concrete. But wherever you can get out to green spaces, that is ideally the best place to be. So the first obvious thing to mention in terms of landscape points of contact with fairy would be trees. They are our closest spiritual relatives in the plant kingdom. Their roots reach into the underworld, their branches reaching like arms, so just as we just did in the fairy tree exercise. and they're a very good point of first contact for the inner landscape. There are some trees that have very specific folkloric qualities connecting to fairy, such as rowans, yew trees, oak trees. But you should be able to tell on an individual basis with trees, when you've learned how to hone your intuitive and energy perceptive skills, which particular trees call to you. It may not be some that are listed as being particularly associated with fairy, but if that individual tree you feel an energetic connection with, then that's a really good place to start. And some trees, if you see a tree that has an obvious opening in it, in its roots, that looks, like a cave or a doorway that it looks like, then you can use that as a visualized point of contact for the underworld to travel into that hole and down into the other world, into the roots of that tree, to meet with a fairy guide and to form that relationship there. You will also find natural gateways are formed often by two trees together. You find this a lot with oaks. Oaks form very powerful gateways. You'll see them in the landscape. Sometimes when I'm driving, it's really quite distracting driving through a landscape and then going, oh, there's a gateway. You see two beautiful oak trees, and the energy coming from there is so powerful. If you can spend time in those locations and pass through that gateway, you can gain some interesting perceptions of the other world and pass through them energetically. And these gateways are not just formed between trees. You might also find them in rock formations, or of course between standing stones, or between hedges. One particularly beautiful example would be St Nectan's Glen in Cornwall, where a waterfall passes through a hole in a stone. Incredibly powerful healing place. Because fairies essentially are liminal beings, so anything that can represent a gateway between spaces that creates inherently a liminal space, it's going to be a really good point for you to connect with fairy. Also bodies of water, lakes, and especially when a lake is reflecting the moon. All of these things you can visualize yourself passing through. You can sense energetically if you learn to feel them out. You can meet with the spirits of rivers, wells and springs, especially the old traditional wells with stone gateway. Those are very powerful gateways to pass through into the underworld. And springs, there are usually with sources of water, with springs, you'll meet powerful fairy beings there, the maidens of the well, normally perceived traditionally as being women in white dresses who are guardians of those wells. And of course, let's not forget the Lady of the Lake from Arthurian legend, one of the most famous fairy beings in all of literature and history. One of the less obvious fairy gateways, because this really does come from experience of or perhaps just natural energy perception, is hills. Now, of course, fairy beings are often spoken of as being the beings within the hollow hills, and when you go by or you stand upon a hill with this particular association, it's a very powerful feeling, and again can be very distracting when you're driving past them. But certain hills have they may sing to you, they may have this quality, and you can spend time either at the base of this hill or on the top of this hill in journey work or in meditation. But it is good to be physically there to contact those spirits, and that would be a very powerful place to perhaps meet a fairy ally. Of course, stone circles, but also mushroom circles, circles of trees, and certain plants and flowers have strong fairy associations, but again, as with trees, there may be individual ones that particularly call to you on a particular day. So when you do exercises like the fairy tree exercise, which are designed to heighten your sensitivity and connection to the landscape, you'll find yourself becoming more and more aware of where these gateways and points of connection might be, so that you can start to form alliances with fairy beings and start to build that trust. So now on to the direction of above and the quality of honour, which we have of course been talking about throughout, and all of these qualities of course interconnect. But honour in terms of how we honour these connections once we've made them, how we honour our connection to fairy, and how we live with honour, we've already spoken about a bit. One of the most effective ways to honour our connection with fairy, and one of the most popular ways to do this, is offerings, of course. And this is also an area that sometimes, I'm not going to be one of those people who say there's no right or wrong answers. There really is. And this is an area that sometimes people do get wrong, perhaps in a well-intentioned way, but they do. So the purpose of an offering really is that it's an energetic exchange between yourself and the beings that you're wishing to work with. It's a gift of energy from yourself to those beings. So it's important to consider what you can give that they will appreciate and respect. It's also extremely important to consider the impact of your offering upon the physical environment, as the spirits of that place will not work with you if you do not show respect for the area over which they are guardians. For example, if you're leaving a plate of food for them, remember to be certain that any creature that comes along will not be harmed by eating any of that food. Fairy beings will sometimes take the form of physical creatures, borrowing their bodies or sending them as representatives. So of course it's of utmost importance to live with awareness and respect for all living things when working with fairy. Continuing with this example, once the food has been out for one night, then the offering is complete. If it has been accepted, it will either have been consumed by creatures, or the energy inherent within the food will have been taken out by the fairy beings. So any food that's still remaining the next day must either be buried, burnt, disposed of appropriately, and not left to rot on the shrine or on the site. So any remains or debris left on a shrine or sacred site detracts from the purity of that energy, and it does give disrespectful signals to the spirits of place. That will attract negativity. The most effective offerings are the ones that you have put some thought into, that are a personal connection between you and the beings that you're working with. So think about what it is that is unique to you, what you contribute creatively to the world, what your strengths are, and how you can incorporate that into your offerings. For example, if you enjoy baking, then perhaps you could bake some cakes or some bread with appropriate herbs. A writer may wish to write and recite a poem, or an artist may paint or draw something in their honour. A singer may sing a song. Indeed, we all have a unique energy signature that's carried in our voice, so one of the very best ways to connect with fairy is through singing from the heart. Even if you don't consider yourself a singer, it's not for the outside world, it's for the fairy beings, and they hear with their hearts, not with their ears. Through song, we can directly connect our energy to theirs, and you may find that the more you use your voice in this way, the stronger both your voice and your connection with fairy will become. And the great advantage of using song as an offering, and this is my personal favourite choice, is that of course it's always with you and it leaves no trace in the environment. Of course, offerings are very closely connected to the concepts of sacred space and spirits of place. And to build a strong relationship with your allies and the spirits where you live, it's a good idea to leave regular offerings in the same place. So perhaps if you have a garden, to build a shrine, and it can be just very, very simple, or as elaborate as you wish, to build a shrine in your garden and leave offerings there. Or if you have a particular place where you feel the connection is strong, to respectfully leave your offerings there, or if it's a song or a dance or whatever, to do your creative offerings there. So appropriate offerings might be something as simple, and this is a very traditional one, a bowl of cream or milk, something that reflects the appearance of the moon, very associated with fairy. Always use full cream milk. I know the vegans out there will probably disapprove of that, but this is about the energy and goodness contained within that. So if you're vegan and you disapprove of using milk, don't use a substitute. Just do something else instead, would probably be for the best. Otherwise that might be quite offensive to the fairy spirits. There are many other options, but milk is an easy offering to give and an easy routine to keep up. Alcohol, just as with human beings, it's a very popular choice with fairy. It's always welcome with deities, with fairy. You may choose to give a whole bottle or more than that on a special occasion. But it's a good idea if you're doing a regular household offering of alcohol, if you have alcohol in your house and you have a garden or a very nearby site that you want to connect or continue a working relationship with those spirits, always give them the first portion. Always give the best portion. Leftovers or remains or the dregs of a bottle are not an appropriate offering. Cakes and bread, again, who doesn't love cakes and bread? Fairies also, these are really great offerings. And also if you have baked it yourself, I'm not a great baker myself, this is perhaps why I choose song and creative offerings, but if you are somebody who likes to bake, then you can put your own energy in that as you're baking, maybe even sing as you're baking it and infuse that with energy, and that makes an excellent offering. Incense, of course. The burning of carefully chosen herbs, barks and resins on charcoal is an excellent offering, provided that you don't leave it to burn unsupervised. Fire, the bad kind, is an obvious result of that. Remember to clear the ashes up afterwards. Of course, it would be very much preferable if that incense is blended with an appropriate magical focus. Some herbs are more appropriate than others. Some processes of creating incense are more appropriate than others. And of course, if you've sourced it and blended it yourself, that's an excellent offering. If you do have a garden, if you're a king gardener, you can grow your own herbs and make your own incenses from that. It would be ideal. And then you know that it's been sourced ethically and you know it's not containing any unpleasant chemicals or anything like that. Music and song, especially with fairy, a wonderful choice as an offering. Maybe learn a simple portable instrument. It's not difficult to pick up a ukulele or a simple wind instrument, and that's a lovely way to dedicate yourself to the fairy path and connect with them. Perhaps they'll inspire you musically. It could set you off on a whole new journey together. Dance. You always have your body with you, no matter what your physical capabilities are. Even if you're in a wheelchair, if you're a wheelchair user, you're still able to move your body in a particular way. So dance is an instinctive and beautiful expression of energy and of emotion, and really excellent source of offering to the fairy realm. Candles, of course, very commonly used for offerings and devotional work. Excellent, so long as you make sure that it's supervised at all times and also that you clean up after yourself. Anybody who's walked around sacred sites and then found other people's stubby wax remains knows that's not a great thing, especially if it's not even a natural beeswax candle. Just don't, you may as well be littering, so that's to be avoided. But candles, obviously, if you're using them properly, are great. Another really good idea when you're working with fairy and you want to do a devotional act or an offering is to do some sort of act of service for nature. So clearing up your local woodland or beach, of litter and doing that sort of service, or perhaps volunteering at a local animal shelter. Those would all be really good ways for you to exchange energy with fairy and show them that you're willing to put in the effort and your own energy into that alliance. Now, there are things that I've seen a fairly common habits of some people who, very well-meaning, but they want to connect with fairy, and there are some things that are ill-advised offerings. I'm going to start with glitter. Now, you can get edible glitter, which is biodegradable, and that's fine. You know, if you're working with children or something and you're doing an entertainment and you want to put on a show of giving an offering or doing something with fairy, please use the edible glitter. Otherwise, there's no real reason to use that at all. When working with fairy, shiny things, great, yes, we all love them, but why use glitter? And especially the non-biodegradable kind. What you're essentially doing there is just scattering tiny fragments of plastic all over the ground. So please think about the actuality of what you're doing. The intent may be fine, but please always be informed and think it through. And that also goes for chocolate. So as a foodstuff, as an offering, you would think this might be good. You know, it has a good nutrition, energy level. It's something that we enjoy. It's a sacrifice that we're giving up because, you know, we want to eat the chocolate. So you'd think fairies are going to enjoy chocolate. And perhaps yes. But if you're going to leave that out in nature, please be aware of how toxic chocolate is to most animal life. And that if you leave chocolate out in nature, it will most likely be that animal life that comes along and eats it. I had somebody make the point to me once that, oh no, nature's animals are filled with innate wisdom and they will be able to detect the toxic substance and thus they will avoid it. No, this is nonsense. Anybody who's ever seen a dog go, oh, I'll have that, nom 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 nom, knows that that's nonsense. An animal out in the wild will see food and eat it, not thinking about whether they have a tolerance for it or not. So please don't leave chocolate out in the wilds. There are many other options instead, which we've already been through. And as I've said, of course, anything that's left over or discarded is a very offensive offering. And also, and this is again incredibly well-meaning, please don't leave your crystals on sacred sites either. They're sacred sites for a reason. Those energies are aligned in a particular way. You go sticking your rose quartz at the base of a standing stone and you're messing essentially with that energy matrix there. Let it be as it is, please. Thank you. It's absolutely well-meaning, but there are other ways to use crystals in your work rather than leaving them around sacred sites or dumping them in rivers or so on. Then we move on to the direction of below, to the moon and to magic. Now, this is a huge area which we won't be able to cover in any detail in this small amount of time. But if your other areas are sound, so if you've worked on your knowledge, on your connection, on your honour, on your trust, if you've built up a strong alliance with otherworldly beings, then your magic will also be strong, whatever form that takes. Whether your magic is a craft magic which involves tools, the blessing of tools, or whether it's the magic that is much more on a otherworldly journey level. If those other aspects are in balance and you're following a good standard of ethics, then your magic will be sound, whatever form you choose for that to take, and everybody's path is individual and personal in that way. The next is the direction of the west, the element of water, and the quality I chose for this direction was joy. How do we bring joy to our work, to our connection with fairy and to each other, and how do we ourselves find joy in the world? And reflecting on that in 2018, the state of the world as it is now, joy seems such a rare and precious resource. But one of the wonderful things about a fairy path is it opens you up to the world of nature in a way that means that when you're really able to lose yourself in a moment and connect with a moment and with the energies within the world, then you can find joy in a moment of sunshine coming through the leaves of a tree in springtime, or to see weeds growing through pavement cracks, and know that nature will prevail. But also celebrate any opportunity to celebrate or find joy, because joy is such a pure and innocent emotion. And if we can always find a way to experience joy, that will help to keep our hearts open and our connections strong. So if you find people that you have a commonality with, of course there are many wonderful fairy festivals that go on around the UK and internationally, and these are wonderful events to participate in. You know, some people might choose to mock those that want to dress up, but just because you're dressing up as something doesn't mean that you also don't hold the belief in your heart as well. It's not just a surface celebration. Celebration and enjoyment are very important. And then your last direction is the south, the element of fire, and the quality allocated to that, or the quality that I allocated to that for this specific purpose, is inspiration. And very much like joy, how can we bring inspiration to others, and what inspires us, and surround ourselves with things that inspire us, because again, that will help to keep our heart open and flowing, always keep fresh energies coming in, so that our energies are not stale, so that we've always got something new to bring, and something new to experience every day, to make life worthwhile, and to make whatever contributions we can make worthwhile. And now we find that we're out of time. So I hope that you have gained some inspiration, perhaps, from this brief overview of some of these qualities that I feel are most important when working with the fairy realm. Of course, this is very much targeted at beginners, but I hope that everybody will have gained something from it. If you wish to know more, my book is called FaeryCraft. There are many other wonderful teachers of fairy lore out there. Particularly recommend R.J. Stewart's work and the work of John and Caitlin Matthews, and of course anything from Avalonia Books as an excellent resource. So I wish all of the blessings of the 7 directions and those 7 qualities on you and your work. May they walk with you, may your fairy allies walk with you. Many blessings, and go forward with honour. Thank you.